Hey guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about myself. I'm going to share my life story and bring my testimony of my encounter with Jesus. Whenever I think about telling my story, one of the challenges that I have to overcome is what area of my life to focus on, because there's so many different aspects of different things that I've gone through that I want to share on. But today I think I'm going to cover as much as I can in detail so that you can get a bigger picture to see the work of God, where it began, and kind of some of the things that He's done in my life. So I'm going to get to that in just a second. Don't go anywhere.
We will be the ones to see it through, and everything lost will be renewed. Long ago in the garden it was to be, now a dream fulfilled in you and me. Whoa.
All right. Before I get going, I just want to mention this. If you haven't listened, back in season 2, I shared a couple episodes with my dad's testimony. He shares about 10 years in his life that leads up right to the year I was born. So that ties heavily into what influenced my life. So I definitely recommend going back and listening to that. It'll give you some context of where I come from and what type of things that brought my life into not just existence through my parents meeting, but also on a spiritual level, some of the things that I come from. And the impact of my parents' testimony really it brings in a lot of the attributes of what set the stage later in my life. And I'll mention that as I get in some of the stuff with my parents. But I'll just start with, I'm the third of 10 children. And I was born in 1982 to a very, very, we'll just call it poor. We didn't have a whole lot, but God took care of us. Don't get me wrong. I don't look back at that. You know, as kids, you don't even notice. You don't know some of those things, but looking back, you can see how much of a difficult time it was. The economy wasn't very good, and my dad had begun working in construction, and it was a tough time for a lot of people. And he was just coming through. If you've listened to his testimony, he was just coming through a lot of difficulty things spiritually in his life, and God was establishing his family. And so I'm the third of 10 children. And so I grew up in that environment where my dad and mom were really getting their feet on the ground after a long ordeal with some powerful manifestations of God in their life that had brought them to Tennessee, where they met and they got married. And I'm growing up as a young person into this environment in a neighborhood where in East Tennessee, there were lots of kids. We had neighbors on one side had 6 kids. Neighbors on the other side eventually had 12 kids, and so we had a lot of fun. We played, and we went all over the neighborhood. There was thousands of acres of unused land behind our house and up a big ridge line, and there was a lake, and so we did a lot of stuff. A lot of some shenanigans that I could tell stories about, like putting nails up through a slide so that the girls, when they would go down the slide, would get hung up on the nails. And then, of course, we all got in trouble for that kind of stuff, and putting each other in old dryers and locking the doors and all different kinds of crazy stuff, and just good, wholesome fun too. Just a lot of children in the neighborhood. And so you get an environment where you grow up with good, solid friends and people that I'm friends with still to this day in my life because of the relationships that I started back then. My parents were very dedicated to and just extremely authentic in their pursuit of God. They gave up everything to pursue God when He called them, and they gave me absolutely no excuse for not believing in God. That's one of the things I've said to many people. Ask me, well, what did your parents do right? When they talk to me about, because they knew my parents or know my parents, and they wanted, from my perspective, that's the number one thing I always say is that I had no excuse. There was no excuse for not believing in God, at least by their testimony. You still have to encounter God for yourself. And that's what actually happened in my life. I remember I was talking about the neighborhood. We'd be running around, we'd be playing, but then you know how it is when you're playing outside, you get worn out, you're all sweaty, and you sit down and you start talking. And at least in our group of friends, we would talk, and we'd talk all different kinds of stuff. We knew, it's funny, growing up, without knowing or understanding much about it, we knew that our parents went to different churches and came from different backgrounds, and so there's discussion about different things, but we all believed in God at that point in our life. Because we didn't know any better. We hadn't really come to a full understanding of that, and hadn't dedicated our life to God. But I remember talking about the things of God and talking about what God meant and who He is. And those conversations, they were real. They were genuine. These are kids. These are everywhere from under 10 to 11 and 12 years old, just talking about Christianity. And I don't know if you've ever experienced that as a kid, or even thought that way as a kid, but because of the culture that we were in, surrounded by other kids and families that pursued God, these were the type of discussions that came up, and it was very interesting. Some of the ways that went about. I don't really remember there being any arguments or anything like that, but I do remember understanding and knowing that we didn't all see eye to eye as families. And of course, there's neighborhood rivalry and different things like that. But overall, it was really good. It was just a good thing to knowing that, hey, God is real. And so that never really came into question in my mind, because I saw the reality of God. Now, there are different questions and things that I had to answer, and as I grew up and as I went on in my life, I had to come to grips to what is real. Do I just believe this because I was taught it, or believed it because I heard it? I had to know Him, and that's what comes into play is during that age, as you're getting older, you start thinking, you start seeing the world a little bit differently. And so when I was 11 years old, I began to take change from my parents. My parents had a jar on their dresser where my dad would just throw in his loose change, and of course, that thing fills up over time. And when I wanted a little bit of cash, like I said, we were poor. We didn't have much, so we were given our as children, the only money that we actually had, we got through doing chores. And when I say got money, we didn't get much. We got 5 cents a chore, and some of the bigger chores, like washing the dishes, when you have a large family, that's a big chore, we would get 10 cents for doing a larger chore. So that would accumulate, and you could have $1 or $2, $1 or $2 saved up by the end of the week. And so when my mom would go grocery shopping or go to the store, we would take that change with us, and we could buy ourselves a treat. And I remember sneaking. We were given the right to go when we'd finished up at the end of the week our chore list. We could show mom our chore list, and she was okay, go get 70 cents or whatever it was that you had earned from your chores. And so we'd go to the change jar and grab change. Well, I started taking more than what I had earned, and which doesn't seem like that's that big of a deal, but God used that simple little thing. I was abandoning my principles. I knew better than to steal. My parents had taught me well, and I was guilty. I was also, my parents trusted me to be honest, and so I had betrayed their trust. This started weighing on me. God started using this to convict me of sin, recognizing that I was a sinner and that I needed forgiveness, that my sin, what I was doing, was wicked, it was evil, and I was going to be separated from God. And I remember thinking about that at night. The conviction of God was resting on me so much, and I remember thinking, well, maybe I can just ignore it and I can live my life. But then I realized God just kind of put an understanding of forever. This separation, this not being with God, being in hell, would be not just some a length of time where you can endure and wait. This is forever, with no hope of it ever being restored, and ever being back in the presence of God. Of course, I'm saying it with a little more developed thought than I had back then, but that scared me and made me recognize that there is nothing that I can do. And I remember praying and thinking about it, and I was like, God, it's like, I don't know if there's anything that you can do. I don't know if you will forgive me. I didn't understand all this. Even so, I knew some of the things about Jesus and the cross. I didn't know if I could be forgiven for what I had done. And I remember praying this prayer, and this simple prayer, this defines so much of my relationship with God, is I prayed, I said, God, even if you don't forgive me and I am not given heaven as a reward, I will serve you no matter what. That realization and that dedication, that willingness to give my life to God, to serve him, not for the reward. It was a mindset that I realized later theologically has a huge impact, because a lot of times people don't even come to that realization. But I believe all of us as Christians have to come to that realization that we are serving God, that we are pursuing him not for what he gives us. And if we are pursuing him for what he gives us, then we are missing out on the relationship, and we're missing out on what God really actually wants from us. Yes, he is good. Yes, he is kind. And yes, he does forgive. And yes, he rewards us who diligently seek after him. That is true. But from our standpoint, when we remove the idea of getting something from it, we encounter God in a new way. And so this opened the door up in my mind from the beginning to understand that, to be able to grow in that relationship. And I think that's what God is looking for in his people. He's looking for that in your heart. If you've never really grasped that, grab a hold of it right now, that God wants you to serve him without a reward, not for a reward, not because of anything, but because you love him. You recognize who he is, and you are going to give your life to him. And so I prayed that. And then I decided to go confess to my parents. And so I went one night, and I don't know how late it was. My dad was probably tired because he had to get up for work, but I don't remember any of that. I just remember feeling the conviction of God on me, and like a hot flame around me. I mean, just burning up. And I was like, I've got to go. I've got to go. So I went and knocked on my parents' door, woke them up, and I confessed to them of stealing change from their jar. And with that confession, things that I hadn't even really thought of, other different impure thoughts, because as I'm a 12-year-old boy now at this point, I'm starting to see the world in new ways, and they're starting to have more and more temptations. They're beginning to have more mature temptations, where things that you recognize are ungodly, because I've been taught and I've been trained to not pursue ungodly things. I'm starting to encounter things like pornography, because I met other kids who had talked about it or had engaged. I didn't know anything about it at that point. I didn't really understand it, but I knew some about it, and so there's temptation. And so as I confessed, more and more of these things started coming out. God began to refine me, began to purify my heart, and get rid of all those things and wash me clean. And so at 12 years old, I was baptized in the lake behind our house. I remember it. It was a beautiful thing. God had done the work. God did it. He convicted me. He drew me. He taught me. And my parents helped me. They encouraged me. And I remember they called some of our friends up, and we had a baptism out there. And that changed my life. That set me on a path that was dedicated to God. I could have easily stayed dedicated to Nehemiah. I could have been stuck in my ways, but that repentance, it was a true repentance that God met me and started washing me clean. And I remember one of the things that God used to really show me how much of a difference that he had made in my life. I was starting at 8 years old. I'd been playing baseball, Dixie Youth Baseball down in Cleveland, Tennessee, a pretty big league, and it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and our family's always been about baseball and done a lot of different things with it. All my kids played, but I'd been playing for a few years. And at 13 years old, the leagues kind of changed. You end up going from having local leagues to it being more difficult to find ball teams to play with. But my dad found a reasonably priced travel team that I could play with. And if you don't know about travel baseball, you play in tournaments in different locations around. Really, you just pay your fees, your dues, and you find different tournaments, and you get into them. It's a lot more organized now than it was back then, but I played everywhere from North Carolina to Memphis, down into Alabama and stuff. So we were doing a lot of travels. I was traveling with my coach. He would do most of the driving because Dad couldn't always be down there, but Dad came a lot when he could. But I remember there was this moment where we were in a game and we were playing, and it seemed to me, sometimes our perspective isn't right. So I say it seemed to me the umpire wasn't doing a good job, and I got ticked off. And there was a call made, and I yelled, "This umpire sucks!" And one of the other guys, who was known to be the black sheep or the bad boy on the baseball team, he yells, "Nehemiah's going to hell!" after I yelled, "No, this umpire sucks." And it was a joke. It was funny to him and to everybody else on the team, but it was an eye-opener to me. It made me realize something, because I had never been outspoken about serving God. It was just clear that I was different. They knew different things about me going to church and different things that were going on in my life, but they didn't know me. I didn't hang out with them. They went to public school. I was homeschooled. And so, but they knew I was a Christian. And when he said that, it caused me to stop and realize, you know what? Whether I want it or not, people do see me. They know who I come from. They know the family that I'm part of. They know what God has done in my life to some degree. And so they recognize that something's different. And I can either show them that God makes me different, or I can be self-centered and I can live a life of compromise. And so that phrase, "this umpire sucks," changed my life. It caused me to realize that I'm living for more than just myself. There is an absolute necessity, and this is for every single Christian. Every single believer must recognize this. Whether you are a preacher, whether you are doing podcasts, or whether you are a singer, or whether you do anything in front of people, by going to your job or going to school, by living your life, you are a testimony of God's grace. And so are we going to be compromised and show people that, it doesn't really make a change, or it doesn't really demand all of my focus, all of my life? Or are we going to be a testimony that God is everything? He has poured himself out and given himself for me. He sacrificed his son on the cross so that I could be saved, and therefore my life is hidden in him and completely surrounded by him. It caused me to realize that. So that was at 14 years old when that realization happened. I continued to play baseball for a while, but at 15 years old, my friend, actually, I was still 14. This is later in that year. My friend, Joseph Byers, gave his life to the Lord. I believe it was when I was 14. He had a powerful encounter with God, and without me sharing his testimony, through him coming to the Lord, many of his friends who he had been involved with, because he was involved in drug dealing and many other different activities, that when God dynamically saved him, it changed his little town of Tellico Plains. And he began a ministry with those people and for those people. On Saturday nights, they would get together, and it was called WWJD. What would Jesus do? Because this was just a brand new thing in their life. And but I remember right before he started that, his dad called my dad up, because they moved from Oklahoma together to East Tennessee, and he called my dad up and said, "Hey, Joseph got saved. Joseph has had his life changed." And Joseph's grandmother came into town, and so we all went out to dinner with their family. And I remember sitting across the table, my brother Michael beside me and Joseph across the table, and Joseph was sharing what God had done in his life. And I could see the light of Jesus Christ shining out of his eyes with such a passion and such a power of the glory of God surrounding his life and the freedom that he was living. And I just remember seeing it and being drawn with everything in me that I want to follow and see and encounter God this way. So I began to be a part of this. Like I said, I was 14. My brother was 16. He was getting his driver's license. So we started going up on Saturdays, fellowshipping with them, and God was just moving. And so this is a big part of my testimony, because Joseph, in a short amount of time, about 30 of his friends gave their life to the Lord. This led to a larger group of people, more people coming together, many people getting saved. And for the next 10 years, basically, but especially for the next 5 years, there was just, it was out of control. It was not an organized, it was not a planned thing. It was not a religious thing. It was not a church that had control over it. It was simply a God thing. We called it the God trap. How he just kept people would come in unexpecting it, and bam, they get snapped into the God trap, and they would be just enamored with his reality. I remember this one time, and this is part of my testimony too, because through that, I began to play guitar because of wanting to engage in worshiping him. I didn't even actually start learning it because I wanted to play in front of anybody. I started playing because I was engaging with worship with so many people, and just seeing the presence of God, the anointing and the power that would manifest as we would go to God and we would give him our love, and we would just celebrate him. I began to learn to play guitar. And so one aspect of this is we were practicing. And so we get together on Saturday early in the afternoon, and what we called practice, which we had my brother, who was actually a very good musician, very well trained, but the rest of us didn't know hardly anything. And they had been playing a little bit longer than me and knew how to play chords. And I was just starting to learn how to play a few chords. But we would practice, but mostly it was worshiping. It was actually just learning to engage with God and with his spirit. And I remember one time in particular, we would usually practice for a few hours, then eat something, and then about 7:00 come back and begin to have a meeting that night, and usually go till about 11:00. But this particular night, about the time we were going to finish up, about 4:30 or 5, some teenagers from the local high school stopped by in the parking lot, and they started coming in. And when they started coming in just to hang out, they knew the service wasn't going yet. But they didn't get hardly inside the door, and the Holy Spirit hit them. The presence of God hit them, and they began falling right there in front of the door, to the point where people would come in, they would be in the way, blocking the door, and people started showing up, more and more people. And we just continued. There was no break that particular, and this type of thing happened multiple times. But that night, I remember there was a stack of people. When I say a stack of people, it's like 10 or 15 people on top of one another. And so we started helping people over to the side, but people were being slain in the spirit. They didn't have control over it, and this was nobody going up and pushing them down or laying hands on them. It was the power of God moving, and so people are getting delivered. They're getting saved and changed. And so that I'm encountering this reality that God is moving in an organic, natural way, not anything that is controlled by man or our agenda. So we let God have his way. We learned how to operate and experience him, and it was beautiful. And there was lots of things that we didn't understand, and we had to grow and learn in understanding. But the presence of God and the pursuit of God is something that came natural, and we encountered him in a beautiful way. Through that, I remember several people were sharing their testimony, and I saw how much love for God that some of these people had. And they were sharing their testimonies about how they had been so involved in drugs, or they had been so involved in alcohol and addiction of different kinds, and sex and immorality, even thievery, breaking and entering. They've been involved in many different things, and they're sharing their testimonies, and their lives are changed, and they're just in love with God for setting them free, for delivering them. And I remember the verse in Luke 7:47 where it says, "He who is forgiven much also loves much." And I remember thinking to God, I was like, that's not really fair. It's like, God, I never encountered any of this. I never went there. I gave my life to the Lord at 12 years old after stealing some change from my parents. I didn't get involved in, quote, these terrible things. And God spoke to me. He said, how much you've been forgiven is just a perspective. The Bible says not to compare ourselves one to another, because that's an unwise thing to do. Because we'll sit there and compare and say, well, I'm not as bad as the next person. And it's not about who's worse or who's better. Yes, there are some people that are definitely dangerous because of what they're involved in, but it doesn't make them any less loved by God. And it doesn't mean that if you're forgiven of something that isn't that dangerous, that you're not forgiven something that's insurmountable. And so that's what God showed me. He gave me a vision of that we're comparing ourselves, and we're this far away from each other. We're comparing each other. But in reality, we're way away from where God is. We can't even, and there's this huge gap here that there's no way to get between. We can't get there. That's what he showed me. And I remember I was like, well, if I've been forgiven that much, too, then I love much, because love is a choice. It's a recognition of who God is and what he's done. And I love him because of who he is, what he's done. And I said, I will never let anyone love you more than me. And that's a promise that I made to God. And that's something that convicts my heart to this day. Whenever I see someone in love with God, instead of being like, oh, they'll cool down, or I want to be drawn to it. I want to be excited. I want to be like, wow, yes, 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 you are loving God. I love God. We are celebrating the salvation of Jesus Christ. So in the process of this, like I said, I was playing baseball as a teenager, and I was really enjoying it. I was quite good. I had a number of different teams that were asking me to play for. I played and I pitched, and I did pretty good. Being a good player and being a great player that you can go on and make a career out of it is a big difference. And I kind of recognized that hey, as good as I am enough to play and have a good time, this is not the direction that my life is going to take. And there are more important things. I wanted to be active. I wanted to be involved doing the things with God's people that I was just talking about. And I didn't want to be spending my weekends, because I would be missing out on, like I said, this was a Saturday night thing. I would be missing out on that virtually for 5-6 months out of the year, because every weekend would be playing baseball. And so I gave it up. I felt like God told me to step back and give that part up and focus on his things. And the reward for that has been mighty. It's been amazing in my life, because with a series of things that led to me being more involved in ministry, being able to get more involved in worship. And as I'm about to say, how it led to me finding my wife, actually. So after a few years of this, I could tell story after story of just the fun, the excitement, and just the genuine organic nature of God moving on his people. But one of the things during this same time, while this is going on, God could put it on my heart that, hey, you know what? There's nothing like this going on in Athens. And so I started looking around. I found a place to rent, and I started a thing on Friday nights called Psalm 66. And it was a smaller thing. It never was nearly as big as what was going on in Tellico, but God still used it in a number of people's lives, because some of my friends couldn't actually make it to Tellico because they live even farther away. It's about a 40-minute drive for me, about an hour or something drive for them. And so, but they could come to Athens. And so we fellowshiped on Athens, and some of the students from Tennessee Wesleyan, now university, back then it was Tennessee Wesleyan College. And so I started this thing, and with several of my friends, I had intended to ask them to lead worship, because they had some experience and they were musicians. And so some of them started playing with me, but everybody who had been a worship leader kind of was busy and started going to college during that time, and it just didn't work out. So me and the other guys, we had never actually done it. We just kind of stepped up and started learning, the hard way, but began to worship God and develop our music. Started writing songs, and it was a fun time. It was something that really, if I had never done that, I don't know that I would have ever become a worship leader, because I would have played guitar and done other different things, but becoming a worship leader, I was kind of forced into doing that because no one else was doing it. And so I'm very appreciative of that. But here's what happened is, as we're doing this, as we're fellowshipping, one of my friends invited another friend that we had both known through homeschooling, who was going to college there as well, who then turned around and invited another friend, who invited yet another friend, and that was Elizabeth, Elizabeth Brewer. I met her through Psalm 66. She came in. It's funny thing, because she came in after we had already begun worship. And I was singing, and I had my eyes closed, and I saw a shadow as somebody's coming into the room as we're singing. And I opened my eyes, and I saw her walk right in front. And I remember the thought that crossed my mind was, I could marry her. It's just a funny little thought, and then I realized, oh, I'm worshiping. I need to stay focused, not think about anything like that, and and then I put it out of my mind, and I didn't even think about it until a few months later, when after getting to know her and start talking to her, God reminded me of that thought once we started dating. But here's how we started dating. This is important because this is something I'm going to talk about again a little bit later in my testimony. I had just been through a relationship that was a good relationship, led by God, but it was also ended by God because it was not supposed to be a marriage. And this was after a string of several relationships that were kind of childish and selfish. In dating someone, even though we were godly, we wanted to serve God. You get tempted. You do fall into temptation physically, going beyond things that you shouldn't be getting involved in as a young person. Seeking the Lord, you should stay away from childish things, because you're not an adult and you aren't in a relationship to get married. That can lead to temptation. So I had been convicted of that. I'd got repented and was trying to do things in a very holy and righteous way. So I got involved with this friend of mine out in Memphis. Jessica Stablin was her name, and we dated for a while, and then when we broke up, I really was at peace. I was like, God, you know what? I'm not interested in dating anyone. And that's right when I met Elizabeth. And so we're getting to know each other, and I'm really feeling drawn to her, as well as attracted to her, because I leave that part of the story out sometimes because I'm not trying to pretend that I wasn't attracted to her. But I had decided I wasn't going to ask anyone out, and I wasn't going to ask her out. And one night, God kind of came and started really putting on my heart that I needed to consider this. And I didn't want to think about it. So I went out for our jog. I took off running. And I ran for about a mile as hard as I could. And when I was out of breath and I stopped to catch my breath, I was sitting there breathing. God said, "Are you willing to listen to me now?" And I said, "Yes. Yeah, I'll listen." And he said, "Well, what I want you to do," he said, actually what he said first was, just like you realize that it's wrong to be in a relationship that you're not supposed to be in, it's also wrong to stay out of a relationship that you're supposed to be in. What I want you to do," he told me, "is you need to go into town and ask her out." And I said, "Okay, I will." I went in, talked to her, asked her out, and started dating her. Starting a relationship with God's permission, with God's ways, getting my own desires out of the way, not doing things out of just personal enjoyment or attraction. It started the relationship off on such a good path. And that same type of thing happened several times. I didn't have the leadership of God of whether I was supposed to go to the next level with the relationship, because as you know, relationships will start with the get to know you part, and then, okay, we're more serious, and then engagement, and then marriage. And when I was getting to through that get to know you part, I didn't have the leadership of God. I felt the same thing. I was like, okay, God, I'm going to break up with her because I'm not going to go further. I'm not going to go beyond what you say. And God again led me, gave me, and this happened each step of the way, all the way to marriage. And the process of removing my desires out of the equation made such a big difference. Our marriage was built on the foundation of God's truth, God's righteousness, and He built a family on that. So I'm trying to get through some of this stuff, but I want to get into some of the little aspects that really established our family. And so one of the things I did is before I got married, is my friend Lloyd Gruber and we had been talking about getting a house together and, kind of having a bachelor pad and spending a few years, just enjoying life. But both of us separately, before God, we were praying, and we're kind of a little bit shy to say it to each other because we had kind of made it somewhat of a commitment to do this. But we felt like God told us to stay at home, save our resources, and begin to get prepared for marriage. That was one of the smartest decisions I ever made, to not go spending my money for a few years. Even if you're not living in sin, it still is a waste of time and definitely a waste of a lot of money that you can be saving up. God actually gives you, if you have a godly family and you have the opportunities to live with your parents, you have an opportunity to live cheaply and get prepared so that your life can be built in a proper way where you're no longer behind. You're not spending the next 15, 20 years trying to catch up because you wasted all that money. Or, in some cases you go to college. You can go to college and you can do it cheaper. Your family can help you. There's different things. I know there's different trajectories in life than just mine, but God used that. So I want that wisdom for people to understand that you don't have to do it. You're not going to miss out. I had just as much fun, had just as much excitement, just as much crazy adventure as anybody else. In a lot of cases, a lot more. And even after marriage, that's another thing, is once we were married, I built my house, and we had 3 children very quickly. That's one thing God shows, we didn't want to wait. And I'm not saying that God never leads anybody to wait, but in general, a lot of times people wait just out of selfishness. And the reality is, kids don't have to get in the way. Kids can be such a fulfillment, such a part of your life. They didn't get in our way. We never stopped going, never stopped doing. It was a blast. And as it turned out, for those of you who know my testimony, my wife got cancer, and after 10 years of marriage, she died. But because we went so dedicated to all these different things, our life was so full. Those 10 years of marriage and life could have been wasted. We could have been wasted in a selfish endeavor of being all about ourselves, but it wasn't. God opened the door for her to be on fire for God, her to receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit in her life, to be touching so many different people before, that would not have been touched before that. They wouldn't have been able to be touched. But God opened that door. So I encourage everybody, live your life wide open for God. There's no regrets in that. But like I said, she was diagnosed with colon cancer, and we started this battle. And that's something that I will say, for anyone who's gone through that, you can be selfish. Even as the spouse of someone, you can be complaining. You can be, why is this happening? What? And yes, there's questions, but that's one thing that we sat there. When she was diagnosed, I looked at her. I said, what's the worst thing that can happen, Elizabeth? Is you can die and you can be in the arms of Jesus. I said, that's the worst thing that can happen. So we're going to live every single day celebrating God, worshiping Him, and we're going to fight for you. So that's what we did. And I don't want to talk about all these things, but the battle it's a tough battle. And for 9 months in and out of the hospital, the last 3 months pretty much in the hospital, seeing a athletic, beautiful woman shrivel up and die, it's painful. It's disgusting. It's something that I want to see freedom in the world from, because that's what I believe Jesus came to do. And eventually we will see all these things overcome and conquered, death overcome by life. We will see this. That is part of our faith, and I love that. But in the process, one thing I will say is many people came to pray for her, and they left touched because she prayed for them. The anointing of God was on her, and some people came to pray for her, sad, and then left there celebrating. One friend of ours said he experienced the presence of God more powerfully in that hospital room with her than he'd ever experienced in his life. Those are powerful moments. And people would come in expecting, and when they knew it was getting towards the end, and it was getting worse and worse, unless a miracle happened, they knew it was the end. They would come in and she would be smiling. We'd be laughing and we'd be talking. And a friend asked me, how are you guys doing that? Why, I said, well, I don't know how many days I have left with her, but I'm not going to spend the days in the shadow or the fear of what could happen or what likely will happen. I'm going to enjoy every single moment I have with her. And so we captured that. And, but after she died, that's a reality that can't be, you can't ignore, you can't pretend isn't real. And so we have to recognize that as Christians. We live in a broken world. We live in a damaged world. Jesus came and he gives us light and he gives us life, but yet no, we don't see all things under his feet. We just simply see Jesus. And so we have to live in faith, seeing Jesus. So we go through this pain when we lose people, when we experience difficulty, overwhelming difficulty. That can define us, or we can let Jesus define us. We can let the faith of God's goodness, his never-ending, complete goodness that is always there, we can let that define us. And I was tempted to do that, and I was like, okay, well, I'm a single dad now. I've got to take care of my kids. Should I back off on living this life wide open? And my thought was, well, maybe I should. Maybe I should just protect and take care of my kids and be a little bit less. And that wouldn't be a bad thing, except in my heart, I knew what God was saying. And so he spoke to me. He kind of slapped me in the back of the head one day, and he says, really? Is that going to be your testimony of my goodness? Because I was kind of like, well, it hurts. This has been harsh. God could have delivered. He could have healed her, but he didn't. I trust that he has his reasons, but it's hard. And so I'm dealing with it. He said, is that going to be your testimony of me? And I realized, no, absolutely not, because I've met him. I saw him. I shared a little bit. You've heard some of the stories of the goodness, of the power of God. I knew he was real, and I saw what he did in Elizabeth's life. Saw how he delivered her, how he empowered her. And I couldn't let that be testimony. So I began to worship, began to praise him. And I remember one time, I'll share this really fast. There was a night at church not long after she had died, where some friends came and they were leading worship. And they were kind of, some other people who knew them but didn't know us came to church. And my friends watched this from the back of the rooms because he told me this, because I didn't know what was happening when it happened. They were worshiping, and my kids and I are on the front row, and they started singing 10,000 Reasons. And we started just jumping up and down and worshiping God, celebrating the love of God, and blessing the Lord with all of our heart. Because the morning of Elizabeth's death, I woke up in the hospital, and I was praying. I was like, Lord, what did you have me do? And he said, sing a song with Elizabeth. She was unconscious at this point, but so I grabbed my guitar and said, what song should I sing? He said, sing 10,000 Reasons. So I sang 10,000 Reasons, and that verse says, whatever may come, sorry, I'm losing the words, but it talks about the morning, and whatever may pass and whatever comes, let me be praising you when the evening comes. I've messed up the words because I'm thinking about other things right now, but that's okay. That's the message. And so I sang that morning. Then she passed away that night. After she passed away, I went to be with my kids, and I told them what had happened. And I held them, and we were crying together, and I said, hey, guys, what do you want to do? And they said, we want to sing. And I said, okay, what song do you want to sing? And they looked and they said, let's sing 10,000 Reasons. So we sang the song together. We worshiped God in the moment of the deepest pain and the most difficult things. We blessed the Lord with all of our soul, with all of our strength. We lifted up his name. And so this night at church, we're singing the song again because we're worshiping him. And so in the middle of the song, I grabbed the microphone and I shared that testimony. But my friend said, from his perspective, we were sitting there jumping up and down and dancing, and and the people who were there that didn't know us were kind of a little bit, didn't know what to think about this, because the song is, for one thing, not that up tempo of a song, definitely, but but they didn't know what to make of it. And they said when we started sharing the testimony of what had happened, they were just melted with the presence of God. He said it was just a transformation. So that testimony began to speak, and that's what I was going to get into here. Is I could never let the goodness of God be anything other than that on display, because through it all, in the middle of it all, before you know the outcome of it, he's just as good, and you can stay in that if you walk in. If you've got that foundation of who he is truly, because you've encountered him. So encounter him right now, right here, right now. This testimony, let this draw you into that place if you've not experienced that. Well, these trials are multiple. They're deeper. There are a lot of different levels to them. One of them is, after my wife died, obviously, is loneliness. And so after that, I begin to think about, okay, well, I've got young kids. I'm a younger person. I was 30 years old. I'm going to, I'm probably going to get remarried. And so I began to think about that. And the temptation is to do it in a selfish way. Well, I've done it in the past. I did it God's way, right? That's what established my marriage. But this time, you know what? I'm going to do it for fun. So I dated a couple of people. Not in a worldly, ungodly attempt to do things evil, but just in a more self-centered way. And God really opened my mind and reconfirmed these principles that were so real. And if you haven't heard it, I have a podcast on what is marriage for. Go listen to it. It has some of these things that I believe in so deeply, of how to establish a marriage, of what God designed marriage for, and how it becomes very empowered by the grace of God and the strength of God at work. Go listen to it. What is marriage for? But he confirmed these principles again. And so about not needing not to be in need of a woman, not to be in need of a relationship, but to only need God, to truly find my satisfaction, to be at peace, to be at rest, to have satisfaction in God, not in need of something else. And then he will provide in his wisdom, in his time, for needs that he knows we have. Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things that you have need of will be added to you. Well, like I said, that incident at church was the first, because I was just a month or so after, but God began to open doors of ministry because he used the tragedy of losing my wife to open up doors and as a means to connect with people who didn't really know me but knew about it, because thousands of people heard about her being sick, because she was a mom of three, a 31-year-old woman, mother of three, homeschooler mom. So that in all these different circles, in Christian circles, the emails were going around, the text messages were going around. Hey, pray for this woman. She's got young children. She's dying from cancer. She needs a miracle. And so thousands of people were connected by this, and God started opening up doors to connect me with different people. And at first I was like, God, I want to minister. I want to obey you. But I said to him, I will never grab a hold of this and take it up for mine. And again, just like you said with the relationships, just like it's wrong to be in a relationship you shouldn't be in, it's wrong to be not in a relationship you are supposed to be in. He said, if I'm calling you and I'm telling you this, then you must do it. Don't do it because of pride or arrogance or self-worth or you think you can accomplish something. Do it in humility because I'm calling you, and go be empowered by God. And so I began to do that, and God opened doors, and I began to speak, to teach, to lead worship in multiple places, different times. But just the relationships began to cultivate in a new way, and God just began to anoint me to speak and teach a lot more. And that's what actually birthed this podcast, to start doing this type of thing over the years. And in this time of God opened these doors, I had a friendship with Catherine Murchoff, my wife, Catherine. I had known her for years. We had met through WWJD back in 1998. I was 17. She was 9. We're 7.5 years apart. And she had grown up around some of those things, given her life to the Lord, and she had been through a marriage that right when my wife was dying, her marriage had separated. And so, without even realizing it, because we had no thoughts of romance, and even for several years after that, we weren't thinking about that. We began to just kind of encourage one another. And just text messages and things about God, about what he was doing, just to keep going, because she, after being left by her husband, she found out that she was pregnant weeks later. And so she's pregnant during a separation. She's raising a little baby during a divorce. There's a lot of battles in her life. And so we began to encourage each other, and we got to we never dated for a long time, but there was a few times where she would tell me something was going on with the church event, and I would tell her, and so we saw each other and we encouraged each other. But it wasn't for a few years that we really opened up a little bit further. And she actually texted me and asked me if I thought that there was anything more beyond that, and I hadn't thought about it. So I told her I'd pray about it, and after several days of prayer, I said I really felt like God said okay and led me to do it. And so we went on a camp out with a bunch of friends to worship the Lord together and do different things, and we ended up talking all night. Started our relationship. Well, we ended up in the middle of that, her divorce stuff. The custody over her son turned into a 4.5-year court battle. We got married in the middle of that. So, which was, without going into details with that, she was accused of criminal activity, of child neglect, and being on drugs and different things like that came up, and had to battle a criminal court case, then finishing that with a custodial court case. With all that, long story short, I mean, when I say long story, I could go on for hours on just that. Long story short, she actually received everything that she'd originally set out in the parenting agreement prior to all the court proceedings. The judge ruled and gave her that after 4.5 years of battle, and God answered those prayers, and she was able to have custody, primary custody anyway, of her son, of our son Benjamin, my stepson, and so God answered those prayers. And so after this is a lot of years of battle, through from cancer to raising kids on my own, to her being separated, to going through a divorce, raising her son, going through a court battle, getting married in the middle of all this, to all of a sudden having to learn how to be at peace again. And so God really began to bring us together. We'd come together in battle and in fight and in overcome every obstacle, and now we had to come together and learn to live in a place of relative peace, of the blessing of God, of having a family and being at peace and being able to enjoy the things of God, and to work together, to lead worship together, to have our hearts knit together, to love Him, to begin to teach, minister, and counsel and encourage people, and to answer His call. That's what He's called us to do. So establishing, it's still my family, but it's a new family, and God has done that. He's brought us full circle, gone through a lot of different things, and I've gone through this as quickly as I can with going on some of the different details. But the number one thing that stood out through the entire thing is the absolute necessity of being connected with God, having that intimacy with Him. Because if anything other than that is religion, anything that is man-made, that you just believe in, that you just have a structure of something, but not the encounter of the relationship with Jesus Christ that He brought through His death and His resurrection, that He allows us to connect with God and be one with God, just like He was one with God. We can all be one together. That's His design for us. And when you walk in that, the anointing of God covers you, and it allows you to, in season and out of season, when you're going through miserable times, when you're going through difficult times, when you're going through all different kinds of attacks, when you're going through good times, and when you are living at peace, you can be just as fervent, just as on fire for God, and you cannot be brought down, destroyed by those difficult times. It shows and tells the rest of the world that our God is real at all times, any moment. And so that's my testimony. That's what He's done. He brings us through all this. And so now, I'm in this place of there's always battles, there's always different things that we face, but it's an amazing celebration of God's faithfulness. And I've said this before, for the last 25 plus years, I've encountered God when I was 12 years old, and I've just been one thing after another, passionately serving Him. I can be dedicated, and I've said that I'm more excited about God right now than I was back then. And I was pretty excited back then, but I'm more excited and more infatuated, more in love, more 100% in on this thing with God right now than I ever was. Because it's growing, because I have more to understand, I have more that He's done, and more that I can testify of. And so the excitement and the reality of God is just as right here. It's present, ever-present help in time of need. He is a faithful, loving friend in every situation. And I love Him, and I will dedicate every moment of my life to serve Him. That's my testimony. And I want it to always be my testimony. I don't know what the future holds, but I know what the past holds, and I know that in that He was faithful. And so I will live in faith of who He is for every single moment and every day of my life moving forward. Amen. I love you guys. God bless you.
We will be the ones to see it through, and everything lost will be renewed. Long ago in the garden it was to be, now a dream fulfilled in you and me.